King from the Collaborative, and I'm here today with the cast of Whitewashed, the Racism Project, including Sakea, Dee, and Royal. You've had one performance so far last weekend at the Art Center of the Capital Region, and actually tonight you are performing at the Alpaca Gallery in Albany. I've seen a lot of the promotional images for this. I haven't seen the performance yet, but the images themselves are really striking, and it seems like a really powerful product. How did this come together? How did you guys decide that this was something that needed to happen in the area?
Well, I think that it's sort of the brainchild of Michael Kennedy. And I guess Sakea sort of said we should do something on, what was it, on police brutality.
Yeah, I had spoke with Michael Kennedy. She's like the artistic director of Creative Action Unlimited. And we were just in Five Guys and we were talking about getting into, because my dad started acting. She was like, would you do a play? And I was like, well, if I was going to do a play, it would have to be about something that mattered to me. So I would really like to touch on something like about racism, police brutality, just social justice issues. And then from there, she really took that conversation and just got a whole team together. People that she thought would just be interested in it. And then, yeah.
Or people that you just threw in it because she didn't care what they were interested in, like myself. So.
A group of us also, like, when everyone who was chosen to be in the production was meeting together, the important piece to this whole thing was that we got to talk to each other and say what we really wanted to talk about in the piece or what we really wanted to cover in the piece. Because racism is like a large umbrella of a thing. And I think that was like really important for me as far as the whole development of the piece, was being able to talk about what we wanted to say and then being able to say it. Michael gave us a lot of freedom to say what we wanted to say.
I think that the other thing about it was the research. We would come up with things like the Hamitic hypothesis and various other subjects. Because there was a historical precedent to racism and how it has developed over centuries. And she did a lot of the research. And I can say, I think that in a lot of cases, she has said to me that she was discovering things about racism that she, as someone who was a little bit more aware, maybe more liberal-minded, did not know and had to face a lot of these things. And I think that one of the themes of the show is to really bring things out to an audience who might think that they are very well aware and might think that they understand, but really in a lot of ways have no clue because they don't understand the historical constructs and the cultural constructs of racism and how deeply embedded it is. So I think that we tried to do a little bit of that through personal stories as well as the research that was done.
So what should people expect to see in how this is told? In how you're relaying these constructs and that deeper sense of history and
they should expect to see everything from, as far as stories, everything from slavery to the present. And I think the way that the show, the way that it flows out, you can kind of see how things are connected to each other and how one era of racism flows into another era of racism until we get to the present and you're like, oh, racism is still here. So there's that piece. I also think that people should probably bring their own tissues. It's a pretty intense show. It's not a show you come to laugh. It's a show to come to and think, hopefully change, hopefully leave the space and then go do something really great in the world to make it better. So yeah, it's that type of show. The show should be something that like changes the way that we feel once we leave the space and then causes us to act differently or circumvent the world in a whole different way.
I was just listening to the interview with Ta-Nehisi Coates about his new fiction book, Water Dancer, and a lot of what he talks about is doing this research that even he wasn't, and finding things that he wasn't aware of, and then sort of finding it the way it was framed, or aspects of slavery. It's about a slave who escapes and sort of stumbles upon magic powers of some sort, but he sort of subverts some of these tropes in the way that slavery was framed, and then also some of the terminology of how slaves would communicate about things, like people being transferred, or the way they would talk about using the railroad and escaping. But it was sort of amazing to me to hear this guy who has led the conversation about reparations and other things, move the conversation forward, but still discovering some of the most egregious and awful parts of slavery. And still he's being, sort of being stunned and moved by them. Have you seen, with only one performance on it, it might be too early to tell, but how have you had conversations with folks after the show to see how they were moved, or how they took some of what you were conveying?
Michael told a story in rehearsal the other night about someone who was in a bathroom, man who was in the bathroom, and he overheard somebody else say something really racist. And because he had seen the show, prior to the show, he wouldn't have said anything, but he felt compelled to say something to the person who had made the racist comment. So, and that's just one little thing. I think that, and I'm saying little, but it's still powerful at the same time. It's like having a show like this is kind of like a stone in a pond, and it's a ripple. And I'm excited to see what that ripple looks like over time. Especially with, like, we have a whole new audience tonight. And I think there'll be some returning people from the first show coming back to see it again. And then the third show, having some new folks. And just to see what that wave looks like in the end would be interesting.
So obviously, as a white person and as a journalist and not an artist, I felt like I've seen people, more spaces, diverse spaces, and more creative opportunities created for people of color to tell stories that matter in the last 10 years. Is that accurate? Am I just sort of, like, do you feel this area is creating more space for that kind of work? Or are you taking it? Do you feel that at all? Has the dynamic changed, or am I just reading too much into that?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't know that the dynamic has changed, because there are so many parts of it that are like institutionalized parts of it that is hard to, to change it, there's things that have to be dismantled. Let me put it that way. Mm-hmm. There are certain constructs that have to be dismantled. So I think that there's maybe an interest, and I think that more people of color are doing more things. But in a certain sense, I think it's maybe, let me put it this way, it's like beating your head a little bit harder against that brick wall. And there's more people hearing it, there's more people understanding that there's something going on. I think that what's happening politically are making people a little bit more sensitive right now. But I don't know. I don't know about you guys, what you think or feel about that.
That's hard for me to answer because I have a platform of my own. And so I feel that I have access in ways that other artists don't. At the same time, though, if I'm looking at Black Theater Troupe of Upstate New York, it exists because there aren't enough platforms for actors of color. And it continue to exist for that very fact. So there's that piece of it. And even this show, Michael gave us a platform, and she used what she had available to give us agency to tell this story. So if that's not happening in other spaces, then these stories aren't getting told. So there's, people have to take initiative to provide that kind of space, and it has to be more than wanting to make something more diverse. It has to be about we're already part of the fabric of a story, and someone recognizing that piece of the fabric is missing.
Right.
So, you know, and completing the piece.
Well, it sort of goes to another question regarding the area in general, and I think a lot of folks here think that Albany is very progressive and free of a lot of the racism and the foundations that they see as being elsewhere in the country. But obviously, people who know the area know that that's not true. Do you address that at all in Whitewashed? Is it, do you think that this is a way to make people look at where they live and the things that are happening here as much as, because, there is that instinct to say, well, that's a thing that, happens elsewhere, and we're liberal and we're,
Not specifically.
Mm-hmm.
There are a couple of parts.
Yeah.
But not really specifically, I don't think. And maybe it's as far as this area,
right.
And so.
Do you think people will leave thinking in that sense and walk away with the sense that this is something that they have more agency in to change, and not it being this thing that happens elsewhere?
I think that is kind of the point,
yeah.
And a major goal. I think that some people certainly will leave thinking differently, and then some people won't because they're just not touched by it.
Yeah.
But although we don't explicitly speak to racism in this area, racism is something that is inevitable living anywhere in America.
Yeah.
Anti-Blackness is something that is inevitable living anywhere across the world. So if you leave, even if you come see it and you think that we're not talking to you, we're talking to you. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it's a message for everybody to really see how racism shows up in their lives, because it shows up not only for white people, also for people of color, also for Black people, because it's so embedded in the system. So there's no way that it's not touching you. So you can choose to not acknowledge it or address it or do anything about it, but then that's a choice that you're making because it's still happening actively in your life.
Yeah.
And so it'll be tonight. And then what else? What are the future plans?
There'll be one more show, October 25th at the YWCA GCR in Troy. And that will be at 7:30. Yeah.
And can you tell me a little bit more about Creative Action? Essentially the mission and how people could get involved if they wanted to.
Well, I know that it's been around for 5 years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Michael Kennedy is the artistic director of Creative Action Unlimited. And as far as the mission, I don't know the mission like word for word, but I just know that it's important and intentional to focus on social justice issues, to create art that speaks to some social issue, and then for that art to then be a form of like a call to action for the audience to go and do something to create change.
And finally, I mean, I know you all are artists in your own right and up to things. Is there anything else people should know that you're check out? I mean, I know you recently released a new book.
Yes. Yeah, I just released my second book. It's called Set the Swing to the Hoop. It's available at some local bookstores, including Market Block Books in Troy, and also on my website, which is dcolin.com. And then I host Poetic Vibe every Monday at Troy Kitchen. So,
I just finished closing a show at the Albany Barn called Messages and Messengers and Messages. It's about 20 sculptures. I basically create spaceships out of junk, and I've created a code, in a sense, where you can decipher what these spaceships would be saying to humanity from that point of view instead of on the ground, as we talk about here. It's sort of like a up there looking down point of view. And that's something that I've been working with Black Dimensions in Art, and of course the Albany Barn, and I'm looking at trying to get that a little bit on the road as well, taking it to different galleries and seeing about having some other events with that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I mean, I'm kind of an out of practice spoken word poet. And I'm fairly new to the area. I mean, this month I've been in Albany for a year.
Mm-hmm.
So all I've been really doing here is trying to find Black people doing art stuff. And I found them, so I'm happy.
Well, thank you all for coming on, and check out the Alpaca Gallery tonight. And we'll look forward to talking to you again. I know you're all busy, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon about your next projects.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.